Number 1. Bad cop. No donut. I'm not anti-law enforcement. I get along well with police. I've known several who were exceptionally good people. My worst police experience as a teen, being mischievous, and hit a cop with a water balloon in the dark thinking it was one of my friends. Big oops. He lectured me and took me home. He remained a family friend for decades. All of them are people, like all of us. But after a trip out of state, I have to wonder if some aren't demons. I went from Utah to New Mexico to pick up my mom because she was having a hard time living alone at age 79, and it was planned that when the time came, she would live with me. My husband was 100 miles ahead of us with a U-Haul truck full of her belongings. I was driving her Nissan car with her 2 fur babies riding in the back seat in their carriers. The cats were seatbelted in and covered with a blanket. We laughed and joked all the way, even stopped over at a souvenir shop because we knew we wouldn't be back again. We drove for hours so far, a smooth trip. We stopped in Gallup, Navajo reservation land, for gas and snacks. It was nearly 1 a.m. When I parked at the gas pump, a Navajo man appeared at the car window, holding a cloth with silver and turquoise jewelry and beaded items. He wouldn't let me open the car door until I rolled the window down half an inch and negotiated for his cheapest item and stuffed $10 through the window. He couldn't stuff the necklace through a space that small and hung the necklace on the car antenna and walked away to sit with his buddy at a picnic table near the convenience store door. Mom and I looked at each other and debated if we had enough gas to get to the next gas station. I hurried and filled up the tank and left ASAP. It felt creepy. We were the only customers in the middle of nowhere late at night, and we didn't feel safe. Glad to be on the road again, we were still talking about the spooky guy and calming down from being shook up. He had a threatening look and mannerisms that suggested telling him no thanks would have been a bad decision, and I felt bullied to buy his goods. I told myself to just buy anything and he might go away. It was cloudy and seemed extra dark. No other traffic on the highway but us through miles of desert. No businesses, no nothing but coyotes, buzzards, and sagebrush, and lots of stray dogs. The dark night was suddenly lit up by a blinding light. I couldn't see anything, not even the lines on the road. Mom joked that aliens were about to abduct us. New Mexico is famous for the Roswell aliens. My guess was it was some redneck with a sixer who were bored or highway robbers. We were both wrong. We entered the twilight zone. The large vehicle hovered very close to our back bumper, deliberately blinding me with a set of extremely bright lights pointed at me. I was driving 65, the exact speed limit. The truck followed for miles before deciding to pass me. Thank God. However, as he passed, he pointed his spotlight at me and kept blinding me. The side of his door said, "Sheriff." We had a bad feeling about this and decided he was just checking us out to see if we looked like we were outlaws. Mom called us Thelma and Louise. I told her that we weren't that far out from the Grand Canyon. Mom's humor was similar to Sophia of the Golden Girls. Mom was a cynical redhead, like mother, like daughter. I tried to be calm and act normal, and make no mistakes to give him a reason to pull us over. In the news for the past several weeks, Mom told me there was a serial rapist cop in that area of New Mexico. I thought she was joking, but she swore she wasn't. This cop wasn't acting right. He didn't want to pull us over. He wanted to scare us. I told my mom to get my phone and call 911 to see why an officer would be interested in us and describe what he was doing. No service. Instead of passing, he was driving along the side of us, not passing. He was shining his brightest lights directly in my face, making it nearly impossible to drive. I know if I pulled over I might regret it, and had to keep us safe. I joked that things come in threes, so what next? We looked at each other and said, "We crash." We tried not to laugh and look at the road. We were calming ourselves and each other with our jokes, but we were truly afraid. He dropped back and got behind me again, following much too closely with horrible bright lights. I was prepared to be pulled over, but he didn't turn on his red and blue lights. For several more miles he stayed behind me and made it dangerous to try to drive. We asked each other all the questions only the crazy guy could answer. Why is he doing this? What's wrong with him? Was it something we did? Mostly we discussed what we should do. We didn't have a lot of options. We planned to stop at the next open business. As suddenly as he lit up our night, he turned off all of his lights. He vanished in the dark. We weren't sure he would pop up again, and it took a long time to feel like we had got away. He had followed us for 25 miles. I trembled for the next 200 miles. I wanted to talk to the sheriff department after I was sure we were safe and ask what the actual just happened. We decided to just be grateful it wasn't worse. We weren't harmed, but shook as hell. We wondered if that wasn't the road cop in the news. And we were so glad we were together and not driving alone. Plan A would have meant we each would drive a vehicle, but when we needed another driver, Plan B, my husband volunteered and towed our car, so we would drive together in her car. The highway we were on was 666, until they changed the number. Did I beat the devil on Highway 666? I'm glad I won't be going back there. Ever. Close call. In 1985, I lived on the Mesa in Santa Barbara, California. Across the street from my home was a mini shopping center with a small grocery store, a lumber store, and a dentist's office. Kim Morgan, a college student, was kidnapped from there after agreeing to meet her abductor under false pretense. She had placed an ad seeking a room in exchange for doing housework and babysitting. There were several witnesses who saw them together, and her car was found there on the day she disappeared. There were sketches of the man in the papers and on the news. He was very distinct, and so was his car. Her photo was also in the news. 3 days after Kim was taken, I was walking to the corner and took a shortcut across the shopping center parking lot. I did this all the time, but today was different. A car, matching the description of the wanted car, cut me off, and a man, matching the description of the wanted man, offered me a ride. I recognized the man and the car from the sketches in the news, and tried to act like I didn't notice. I said I didn't need a ride because I was near where I was going. He insisted that he drive me there. I pointed at the dentist's office and said, "I'm already to my destination." The man became angry and told me he'd drive me. I walked away behind his car and made a point to look at his license plate as I walked 30 steps to the dentist's office. I wanted to run, but had to walk calmly. I entered the office and told the receptionist to call the cops because Kim Morgan's kidnapper just tried to get me into his car. The lady looked out the window to see his car leaving the driveway. Dr. Bartels was my dentist, and everyone there knew me. I forgot the license plate number before I got into the office. The police were called, and I gave all the info I had. At their suggestion, I didn't continue my journey to the fast food place in the next shopping center, and didn't go back home in case he was watching nearby. The police were going to have to take me home, but they didn't want to show the man where I lived. The plan was to stay in their waiting room until my mom could pick me up after work. I was very shook up and creeped out. There was no doubt it was the same man. I felt lucky to have had the presence of mind to act calm and get into the nearest business for help. Mom picked me up almost 3 hours later, and we went home. I was grateful to the staff, who stayed 45 minutes past closing time, but they locked the door at 5 for safety. Mom watched the news every evening. 2 days after she had picked me up at the dentist's office, a shocking top story chilled me to the core. Some of Kim Morgan's dismembered remains were found in the Los Padres forest, less than 10 miles from my home. There was another shock to me because I often rode my bike on the forest roads. I'd pack a lunch and make a day of it. I was feeling lucky that I didn't cross paths with him because I doubt I could have gotten away. There were similar murders that summer, and a possibility the man was a serial killer. He was never caught. Hi, I'm a subscriber to your YouTube channel, and I have a more creepy sleep paralysis story than scary. I had my first and only sleep paralysis thus far 2 years ago at Mars 5th. I'm a female at 25 right now, and my name is Daisy, and this sleep paralysis I had was kind of creepy and strange. I was asleep, and then I woke up by having a shadow cat looking at me and just walk around me in circles, and I couldn't move anything then, just my eyes, and every time I blinked the shadow cat had moved to another spot. It was even on my shoulders and face, and in front of me, and next to my window, and it just kept walking around me and staring at me, and then I saw a black shadow outside my window, coming closer and closer, until the shadow figure is right on my outside window, and trying to break in, and then hitting the window, and it sounds like the window is about to break every time the shadow figure hits the window. Then the shadow cat hisses at the shadow figure, and pulls out its claws, and scares off the shadow figure before it could get in. And then it stares at me with its claws out, and then goes closer and closer to my face, until it just disappeared. And then I could move again, and then the next morning I woke up, I had scratches on my cheek and hands. Number 4. The Reeker. I met W in 1988, or as KOC likes to call him today, Big W. He was a bartender at the then famous local rock club, the Tucson Garden. It had been the original Tucson Community Center, built during the 60s. It was under private ownership at the time, and was famous for headlining bands after their main shows in Tucson, or Phoenix, Los Angeles, or even as far away as Toronto. Sometimes they would do encore performances, perhaps as a tribute to their glory days, or just to have fun and party with the locals. Either way, the Garden drew customers from far away as the UK, Australia, Europe, Canada, and Mexico. The Garden had a capacity of about 2,000 people, not including those that frequented the parking lot. It had 2 bars, a 1,200 square foot dance floor, and great acoustics. I used to dance there, a regular out-of-town local girl who just moved to Tucson 4 months earlier and was out almost every night, looking for new friends and otherwise, just hanging out, and dancing to the live bands that would show up 3 nights out of the week. Me and my sisters, along with friends, were always looking to see a live show, get blasted, and have a good time. Because I didn't know a lot of people, I was hit on constantly, and usually took refuge at whichever of the 2 bars W was working at. Some of the other bartenders didn't like me going to his bar because they thought I was the one that attracted the largest crowds. But whether I was there or not, W's bar always had the largest crowds. He spent his free time, though, talking to me and always coming back to serve me my fruit slices and ice water. I appreciated that he treated me like I was just another paying customer. During the early years, we attracted some of the strangest people in some of the weirdest circumstances. I remember one time on his night off, when we decided to skip the Garden and went out to a techno club called the Wild Wild W. The DJ played mostly techno and dance and early hip-hop. W and I danced from about 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. closing time. We were drinking Wild Tea 101 without my usual sliced fruit and water. For some reason, this one door guy decided that he didn't like him. He wouldn't even let him in unless he went home and changed his clothes. But I, of course, could stay if I wanted to. I got the impression they were trying to separate us. By closing time, almost everyone else had left, but we kept going all the way to the last call. It was fun. As we were walking out, I remember the door jerk glaring at him like he could kill him. Together we had drunk almost an entire bottle of Wild Tea 101. For the better part of 6 hours, we didn't have one accident or break one beer bottle or any of the rules. Oh, and Wild Tea is the best bourbon on the planet. After we headed for home, about 1:30 a.m., southbound on I-10, two guys in a black, pitted for shit, 1978 Ford F-150 monster truck tried at first to tailgate us at 7 miles an hour and then sideswipe us between lanes. The SUV they were driving was equipped with a spotlight. They used it to try to blind us so we lose control and crash. It was pretty scary. We sped up to see how fast their piece of shit truck could run. Then we got it up to about 110. The Ford, shaking itself apart, trying to keep up, started to fall back. But before they could completely clear off, W hit the brake so hard, the Ford nearly flipped, trying to get out of our way. Just as soon as they were about to regain control, though, W made a hard right, cutting across 3 lanes at about 90 miles per hour, and then up the off-ramp and across the overpass. We just managed to spot their brake lights by the time they were halfway to the next off-ramp. We found ourselves in the barrio at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. I thought of that hateful doorman. We turned into an alley with the stealthiness of a cat, the lights off, going up about 2 blocks, turning around, facing the direction we've come, and then we stopped. W rummaged under the front seat and pulled out an old Louisville Slugger. I had my 2-edged boot dagger and my trusty machete. We turned off the motor and waited. After about 10 minutes, we saw the Ford tear past the alley entrance, 2 blocks up, at about 85 miles per hour. After we were both satisfied that we'd shook him, we got back in the car, stowed the bat, and just sat there looking. Right that minute we looked like we could have come from another century entirely. We just sat there, looking at each other, and then we started to laugh. Once we started, we couldn't stop. We laughed so hard, we had to roll up the window to keep from being heard and attracting any more unwanted attention. We laughed so hard we couldn't breathe, and had to roll the window down again anyway. It was gut-wrenchingly hilarious. I still bust a gut thinking about it. Our relationship was never perfect. We had problems from the outset, and we actually split up many times over anger, petty arguments, jealousy, and pride. Sometimes we got into some pretty raucous, knock-down, drag-out fights. Our lives apart, though quieter, always gave way, eventually, to one or the other, usually me, deciding that it's time to try again. Eventually we decided that if being apart and then getting back together again was an indication of anything, it had to be that we, despite our falling out, would one day grow up and put all that aside and just be together. The last 20 years proved that to be the case. After the garden closed, and after a brief stint in San Diego, California, working for Greenpeace USA, we bicycle toured down the California coast, over the coastal mountains, across the Mojave and Sonoran deserts, and back to Tucson. We'd already decided that rather than getting an apartment or a rental house in town, we'd live out along the Santa Cruz River. Because we'd already spent about 6 months living along the California coastal beaches and the San Diego River, we were well seasoned for living out along the only river of its size to run backwards from south to north. After leaving my tortoiseshell cat a darl for the time being, with my mother. We found a place far enough north to put us just outside the Tucson city limit and the Pima County's jurisdiction, so the restrictions to build and burn were considerably lax. When we chose a site, we set up to carving out a floor, walls, steps, a hearth, and below-ground caches for water and food storage. Because there was no electricity, we relied on our fire pit, devotional candles, and oil lamps for cooking, heat, and light. We built a kind of a six-sided hogan, a Navajo hut, right out in the Sonoran Desert, surrounded by desert willow and mesquite. It proved to be safe, hidden, resilient, clean, and dry. My sister, Kugels, would have loved it. We wish she could have been there. Because the land we were on was owned by a private interest, a Japanese family out of California, we were allowed to use their still active artesian well for cleaning, bathing, cooking, and general all-over consumption. With temperatures in the triple digits for about 4 months out of the year, 40 degrees deep well water was much appreciated. We worked and lived in and around the area for about 3 years. Over time, we made some pretty interesting acquaintances of some of the locals and homeless, and even some of the migrants. They came from all over the U.S. and Mexico, and some as far away as Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Honduras. Some were on the lam, hiding out from the wants and warrants, and some were like us, wanting to live out. Most of the migrants were just looking for food, water, safety, opportunity, work, and above all, citizenship. Even in the relentless heat, the monsoons, the lightning storms, the bee swarms, the ant invasions and visits by the Sheriff's Department, the National Guard, the Tucson Police, and others, we found each other there. The monsoons were fascinating and surreal. During that time of year, from about May to August, the washes that fed the Santa Cruz would run and flood the surrounding area for miles. The fresh water making contact with the sunburnt soil and seared vegetation left a strong and appealing aroma that is impossible to forget. At such times, many of the critters and people that lived there would, once the water receded, come out to play. There were rattlesnakes, bull snakes, centipedes, scorpions, vampire beetles, spadefoot toads, ducks, geese, hawks, ravens, and once 2 migrants, a father and son, who came in sometime in the early morning and passed out under a group of mesquite trees along the now running wash across from where we built our hogan. Since it was about 5 a.m., we let them sleep and decided to make a huge pot of tuna casserole with mushroom soup, milk, sautéed brown mushrooms, sweet green peas, onions, egg noodles, butter, and 2 loaves of uncut whole wheat bread, toasted over mesquite coals, with butter and strawberry jam, and of course, 2 2-liter bottles of our best artesian well water, vintage 1991, courtesy of the Japanese family that owned the entire 10 acres. When we brought it out to them, they were already awake, probably because of the heat. Neither could speak any English. We thought we heard the father say that they were from Guatemala. They ate their fill and gratefully accepted the water and what was left of the food and walked out of the area and hopefully on to a better life. One particularly hot and humid monsoon morning, I was sitting and listening to the mourning doves that frequented the area. They, along with the Gambel's quail and the occasional roadrunner, were a constant. Every morning during the summer, about 5 a.m., I would hear the soft coos, clucks, or calls. He was getting water out of one of the below-ground caches we'd built when he yelled out, "Cat, you've got to see this." He pointed to just inside the cache, between the earthen wall and the bottles. It was the first time I'd ever seen a male blonde Arizona tarantula, black legs, copper-colored carapace, and reddish-brown abdomen. The tarantula sat completely still as I reached down with my left hand, petting its abdomen with my right. Before I knew it, the huge spider slowly crawled up and onto my open palm. It was bigger than both my hands put together. It sat there completely still, while I continued petting it with my right hand. I could clearly make out its 8 black glistening orbs looking back at me, as I continued marveling at this masterpiece of nature, stroking the top of its abdomen in one direction to not disturb the hairs on its back. It did a very surprising thing. It began to push up and against my fingers like a cat. When I would rub it in exactly the right spot, it would push up and then settle back down on my open palm. Once I began to get the message anew, it would push itself up almost to the length of its legs to get a more thorough massage before settling back down on my open palm. Because we had errands to run, he said, "We'd better leave now, or we'll never get out of here." I could have played with the tarantula for the rest of the day and into the night. I placed the tarantula back onto the water cache. It reluctantly but gracefully walked down to where I'd found it earlier. It stayed with us for a few more days, until it apparently decided to retreat to one of the many burrows that dotted the landscape. Because it was laundry day, that meant taking all of our clothes to the nearest laundromat, about 2 miles by bike along the Santa Cruz River levee, and 2 miles across the open desert to just this side of the Tucson city limit. Once we arrived, I started to load the washing machines with all the clothes we'd stuffed into our bike panniers. W left to go use a payphone. This was before cell phones or mobile phones. As I was loading the final dryer, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, middle-aged man approached with what looked like a glass of liquor in one hand and a crumpled-up $1 bill in the other, and asked if I had change. I told him that, unfortunately, I didn't have any to spare. My answer seemed to aggravate him. When he stepped closer, I tried to point out the change machine on the wall. That aggravated him even more. Crowding me further, I started to ask him to please step back, and for the first time, I noticed his bloodshot eyes. Between his eyes and his breath, the guy was definitely ripped. Seeing my discomfort, a slight grin played at the corners of his unshaven and vomit-reeking mouth. He seemed to be enjoying this. Starting to get angry, I, still believing in treating people with the same regard, despite one's disability, obnoxious behavior, or self-indulgence, noticed his tongue darting in and out of his mouth, licking his lips, as if he were a lizard and I was his prey, something to be stalked and eaten. He was apparently still in his stalking mode. As he persisted, I began to become quite agitated. Still holding his drink up in one hand, with a crumpled dollar bill in the other, I saw when his stringy blonde hair lazily fell across one eye. I remember thinking of Poe's telltale heart, his invasion of my personal space, and my unease began to make me angrier. I always thought of my anger as a kind of self-defense mechanism. I had used it throughout most of my life, especially after I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I held this special power, as I called it, particularly close to my heart, to only be used as a last resort. It had saved me on more than a few occasions. The situation with this guy was rapidly escalating into another one. He must have sensed something, because now he simply would not leave me alone at all. He kept pushing me further and further with his rancid breath and bloodshot eyes. Still, I maintained an outward calm, even though I was clearly wishing him miles away. It was, unfortunately for him, short-lived, because he asked another BS question, this time squarely in my face. The stench of intoxication almost made me want to vomit. I took a step back, a thing I rarely did, but the smell of his ingested liquor, curdling breath, flooded at my air intake to the point where I wanted to scream. He eyed me quizzically, taking a sip of the 110-degree backwash that was more saliva than alcohol. Because I'd already given him more attention than he deserved, he wasn't going to let me get away that easily. With that one step back, he felt suddenly emboldened, but my reaction to it made his wicked little grin fade really fast. Taken aback and seeming to have forgotten his original question, he suddenly thrust the sorted dollar bill back in my direction, like it was somehow more than enough to pay for the answer he wanted to hear. Gagging at the smell of something that was once called a drink, I once again pointed in the direction of the change machine on the wall. Angrily he snorted, "But you have more than enough." Like that and his breath were supposed to be enough. Again I repeated, "In the corner," gesturing in that direction. "Are you afraid of me?" Now that made me furious. I turned around and looked at him square in his glazed blue, bloodshot eye, bad breath or not. "I'm definitely not afraid of you. The only thing I'm afraid of right now is your horribly putrid breath and your unwanted presence. And I want you to back the fuck off, turn around, and leave me alone. And I mean now." Of course, this time he became enraged, not so much because of what I said. He probably didn't comprehend most of it anyway, as the tone and menace in my voice. He spun around so fast I was sure the vertigo would cause him to fall flat on his face, or the other part of him I would have rather seen heading towards the floor. Fortunately I was spared the act, and he, my derisive laughter, if I'd been mean enough or he'd been sobered enough to appreciate it. With the maw of hell breath now pointed in the opposite direction, I took my own long-awaited one and giggled softly at the prophetic image of him passed out on the laundry room floor, oblivious to even the dust devils, fleeing desperately, the smell, and then some disgruntled police officer checking his ID and finally picking him up off the floor, the dust devils cheering, and into the waiting van of environmental justice. After the shock of a deafening loud crash, he had slammed the glass door, shaking it almost to its foundation. He exited the laundromat, cursing under his toxic breath. I just managed to see him disappear around the corner of the building. I thought that was it. Laundry drying, threat averted, danger past, and then, like a recurring nightmare, I sensed his hand near my privates, and that awful reek of alcohol. He'd snuck back in and was behind me. Still bent over from filling the last dryer, I instantly drew my two-edged dagger from my boot, and in one smooth upward moment sliced the back of his forearm, all the way to the wrist. He began whooping, cursing, spitting, and calling me every name in the book. A crimson ribbon of blood ran from the hilt of the razor-sharp, twin-edged metal blade to drip off the tip on one side and onto the floor, as his blood began running down his arm. A growl deep in his inebriated belly began turning into a long, drawn-out, high-pitched howling scream. I stood there, defiant, my weight distributed evenly on both feet, motionless, ready to cut his throat should he try anything else. Then I moved quickly away, out of reach, his face contorted in pain, his mouth still gaping open. I barely noticed the car in the parking lot, directly in front of the otherwise empty lot. The fox standing before me, blood dripping from his upper arm to the wrist, had his right hand cradling the other. He hugged his bloody arm close to his body, as if it were his baby. An image of a brand new bottle of cheap-ass whiskey entered my mind. He acted like he was holding on to it for dear life. He was. His previously dirt and sweat-stained white shirt looked like something out of a slasher horror film. Blood seeped like the writhing tentacles of an H.P. Lovecraft Call of Cthulhu novel. His blood spread out in all directions to saturate what little white was still left. In seconds his shirt was soaked crimson. When he dared look at me again, my lips shut tight in a grimace. He had to pass out sometime, I thought. What fright I had felt before was now a seething fury. I heard the sound of the side door opening. I saw from my peripheral vision a woman hurrying her laundry through the all-glass side door. The asshole, through his pain, yelled a last-ditch effort to make himself seem the victim. "I'll kill you, you bitch." I stood firm, holding the dagger up where he could see it, waiting for him to try it again. Momentarily I cringed as a single drop of the fucker's blood dripped into my hand. Not because it was blood, but because it was his blood. Right then, I wanted never to feel anything that belonged to him touching any part of me ever again, especially his breath. Believing he now had a witness, he threatened, "I will call the police and tell them you attacked me." My brow shot upwards and I laughed, though still pissed. With mock trepidation and a complete and total sense of irony, I offered, "Oh no, really? In fact, please do. I think I might have a couple of quarters to spare after all." I guess he didn't find that funny. Then I heard the woman behind him say, "No need, you stupid shit. I saw the entire thing, and I will tell the truth. I saw you put your hands on her. She was only defending herself." He grimaced, and with a quick and almost unnatural twist of his body, maybe he was a lizard after all, fled the scene and disappeared out and around the corner, this time for good. The Reeker was never heard, seen, or smelled again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.